section 6.2, looking at human population growth. One of the things that we want to pay attention to is our new definition of the word population and the idea that it is just one species. So we had an ecosystem, we had a community, and then we looked at populations. And so we're spending this time to wrap up the year to talk about how humans have influenced the planet. And so we're starting by looking at human population growth.
So initially, what caused the human population to grow? Some of those causes are the agricultural revolution. This is when more food was available to support people. The industrial revolution, where improvements in technology and medicine increased the birth rate and decreased our death rate. And urbanization, where we had the development of cities and economic and social development as well.
And so what really caused the human population to grow was the elimination of limiting factors. If you go back to the idea of population growth, remember there's a J curve and there's something called an S curve where it should stabilize. And what we see with human population is that we've gotten rid of a lot of limiting factors. There's plenty of food, there is plenty of space, and diseases are one of the things that the Industrial Revolution really got under control with increased health care and increased sanitation and increased medicines. So when we look at these ecological ideas, we want to start connecting them back to humans and how has it affected humans. The main thing that we've seen is that the human population has kept growing. It has never stabilized.
So from there, again, what we were saying earlier, we have the human population growth with the J curve, and you can see that it's still continuing to increase over time. And we haven't hit a carrying capacity yet.
Very good. So have not reached carrying capacity. And this is really an artificial idea. Please make sure that you add this in. It's really an artificial idea that we should have already reached a carrying capacity, but because we continue to be innovative, because we continue to use technology, we have really increased the number of humans that should be on Earth.
So then some effects of the human population growth are overcrowding, increases in pollution. All the environmental problems relate back to human overpopulation, and decrease of natural resources. So the more people we have, the more requirements we have for our resources. And then we also have increase in land use.
So one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that humans are innovative. We do try to solve problems to make our lives easier. And sometimes solving those problems actually causes bigger problems. So who wants to have to take the trash out every day? And so what we've done is we've brought these huge trash bins. You put your things in little trash cans, then we put it in the big trash bin, and then you wheel it out to the side of the road, and you never really have to see it. So because there are so many people, we are causing a much bigger problem. And tomorrow we're going to look at 4 of the specific problems that humans have been causing. But for now, we really just want to understand that increases in pollution, decreases in natural resources, all really relate back to the fact that the human population continues to grow.
Some solutions that we have for this problem is what's called zero population growth. And that's the idea that our birth rate and death rate are going to be equal. And so we're not going to have more births than we're going to have deaths. Places like China have actually started offering tax incentives for people that have only one child, and also increasing in birth control and education can also decrease that population growth.
So one thing that we need to be careful with when we talk about zero population growth is really literally necessarily meaning that the birth rate equals the death rate. If you have two parents, those parents will one day die, and they could have two children. Now, this is a really difficult topic. If you look at a family with more than two kids, that family might be really happy. All of those people might be very healthy. And so we start to question, well, why can't I have 3 kids? Or why can't I have 4? Why can't I have as many as I want? And so we start to run into this idea of, well, is 8 children okay? What if you need support for those 8? Think about Octomom, for example. And so the goal isn't that you have to make a requirement, but that you encourage people to think about how many children they really want to have.
Some other solutions are conservation, and conservation means being wise and careful about the use of resources that we have. That goes back to reducing, using less materials, reusing materials, using more products more than once, and recycling, returning products back to be reprocessed or reused. Sustainability is the idea of ensuring the availability of resources and a stable environment for the future generations. So by doing these things, you can lead to the sustainability of those resources.
So these are some of the solutions for how do we handle the human population overgrowth. One of which is trying to encourage people to not have as many children. The other is the idea of how are you using your resources. And the third is keeping in mind that Earth is currently the only planet we can live on. What this leads us to is how can we actually track whether human population will one day reach zero population growth. We're not asking everybody to die. We don't necessarily want the population to decrease. We just want it to stop increasing. So the last part of this section of notes is actually about a tool that we use to measure if the population is changing. So what can a histogram reveal? It can reveal trends in the population. Is the population increasing, decreasing, or is it stable?
So starting off with our first population, this is an example of Kenya's population. If you look at the very bottom, we have our babies to 4-year-olds, and all the way up top we have our 80-year-olds. At the very bottom here, you see that our pyramid is bigger at the bottom, so that means that we're increasing in those birth rates. And at the very end, you actually have very few older people, so these people up here aren't living as long.
So one of the trends to look at when you see a histogram is we see ages. We see them broken up in 4-year increments, and we see males versus females. These are percentages of the population, so these are not numbers. So if you have a lot of young people compared to old people, this large amount of young people in 10, 15 years will be up here. And guess what you do between the ages normally of 20 and 50? You have kids. And so if there's a lot of kids this age, then in about 20 years, they'll be having kids and they'll have even more children. Versus you don't have as many elderly people who might soon be dying. So the key to understanding this graph is really if you have a lot of young people, then in the future, they will be reproducing. But I also think that this looks like an arrow pointing up, which means that the population is increasing.
Then with the U.S. population, we have, basically you're seeing it look pretty even here, but still same thing as with Kenya. Up at the top, we have fewer people dying. So this is representing a slow growth in that population.
And the U.S. is kind of known to be almost stable. Of course, one of the things that this doesn't take into account is immigration, people who are coming into that country, and emigration, people who are leaving that country. This just tells you how many people are what age.
And then the last population is Germany. And here you can see that in the middle you have your biggest population, so that 40s, 20s, 30s age group. At the very bottom, you actually see kind of narrowing down, so they're having less births, less new children. And so then your population is actually starting to decline, because eventually you're going to have less people having less babies, and so this is considered negative growth.
And again, it can sometimes look like an arrow pointing down. Keep in mind just a few things. There could be lots of reasons why a country's population is decreasing. Some of the common reasons are war or disease or famine. So there can be lots of reasons why a population is increasing or decreasing over time. What you have now, we have reached the end of this section, and if you will do your summary box, again, in your summary, you need to pick 2 words. And the big key that we're starting to get into is we're not expecting that you could change everything about your behavior. If you go back to the idea of reduce, reuse, recycle, there are small things you can do. So one small change would be, and so we'd like for you to think about one small change that you could make that could help you either reduce your impact on the environment. So maybe this is just making sure that you try to do all your errands in one day instead of going and coming. Maybe this is just going to the grocery store once a day. Then there's the idea of reuse, right? Could you maybe buy some clothes at a thrift store? And then the idea of recycling. Can you make sure that you get your water bottle into the recycle bin? So picking one small change that you could do. So copying this and then completing that sentence.